Hi there, my name's Rob, and this is my cumulative project. I wanted to take the opportunity at the end of my degree to take everything that I've learned in both sociology and psychology and present a sort of report on something that I think is important, something that I think is a problem that I think that I could do some good about, at least educating people on. And the topic I want to talk about today is going to be a dour one, so don't click off. Homelessness. I know that's a tough topic. Some people listening to this video might have experienced homelessness before. I have. And I know lots of other people who have. It's becoming a growing epidemic of sorts in the United States. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is the United States department responsible for monitoring things like housing inequality and housing insecurity, estimated that in a single night in January 2022, around 582,462 people, just over 500,000 people, which is more than the population of Atlanta, were experiencing homelessness in that single night. And that number was gathered, and is likely a low estimate, based on a specific area with a per capita and then how many homeless people they could find in that area. Which is, imagine trying to find every homeless person in an area. I mean, you just never could. People who experience homelessness often travel to different parts of the city or remain out of sight for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about today. But I want to talk about what being homeless from their perspective, less sociological, more psychological, what being homelessness feels like. So, for one, you're more likely to become a victim of violence and sexual assault. More than twice as likely to become a targeted victim of violence or sexual assault. Take someone who has a home, remove their home, they are now twice as likely to experience violence or sexual assault, which is wild. But if you also take somebody who is homeless and give them a home, their chances of becoming a target of those kinds of things only drops by 49%. So we see that some of these features of homelessness can become chronic. We see that there's high comorbidity with homelessness, mental health, addiction, and stints in the prison system or the jail system. We see all these things interact with each other. If I'm mentally ill, I'm less likely to be able to hold down a stable job and this can become homeless. If I'm dealing with addiction, I might not be able to meet my bills. I might have run-ins with the police because of my illegal substance that I have on me, and then when I finally do become released from prison, I'm now a convict, which makes it hard to get a job and hard to become home, and I'm homeless again. If I'm homeless and I don't have a job, how am I supposed to be able to afford or get at the very least the transport to the pharmacy where my psychological medication is so that I can get back on my feet? We see all of these systems feed into each other. It's one big ball of insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity. But specifically homelessness has some very dour side effects, specifically medical. People who experience homelessness are far more likely to experience minor traumas, specifically things like traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, or transmissible diseases like HIV, other blood-related illnesses. Because you're just not able to take care of yourself as reasonably without something like a shower, transport, a safe place to sleep, regular food, safe food, clean water. These are all things that we can often take for granted. Myself, I'm recording this video in a spare bedroom. Think about that. I'm talking about people who don't have a home, and this video comes from a bedroom that we don't use. I think that we can all at times take this for granted, especially when something like the homeless youth population is growing. The number of homeless youths, because when I was a child, I dealt with homelessness, but it's because my mother was homeless. When she became homeless, I couldn't work a job, couldn't pay for my own rent, so it made me homeless. And I'm far more likely in that situation to become targeted. And how are we treating these people who are struggling with all these medical illnesses and mental illnesses and addictions and problems? Well, we see mostly targeting. In Cookeville specifically, we've seen recently the punishment for panhandling has increased and enforcement of it has increased. Here in Chattanooga, I see a lot of something called hostile architecture. Things like benches with handrails on them so you can't lay down. Or underneath bridges, you put spikes so that people can't sleep there. The physical buildings themselves are being designed to make it unsafe, unhealthy, unable to be homeless. And then we see that the only response tends to be to incarcerate them. Loitering. The laws for loitering have become far more stricter and are being enforced larger, especially in large cities. We see some of these mandatory minimums for repeat offenses of loitering. Loitering is just not having any place to be. If I don't have a home, I'm always loitering. Where am I supposed to go? We've seen some states even put in laws where you're not allowed to sleep in your car. Well, if I'm lucky enough to have a car to be able to sleep in to shelter myself from the rain, you're going to punish me for that? Well, then I spend time in jail. I spend time in prison. Things are put on my criminal record. I could be charged with a felony. And that makes it even harder to reintegrate myself into the system that is so desperate to get me back in, I guess. If you don't want homeless people, then, why make it harder to become homed again? It's even been estimated that the cost of housing somebody in something like a mission, which is a lot of people who are on homes, best way of being sheltered from rain and cold, hosting somebody in a mission is more expensive than just paying their rent in a cheap, affordable housing situation. The cost of the EMS for their medical needs, the price of incarcerating them, and the authorities and their time spent and the resources spent incarcerating them, all of this is far more expensive and all paid for with taxpayer money. It's all far more expensive than just giving them the opportunity to become homed again, something that I'm almost definite that they would want, right? So, being homeless is dangerous. It's bad for your health. It is deadly. Being unhomed is deadly, and it can make your mental illness, your issues with addiction, your issues with the police far worse. Every aspect of your life is made so incredibly terrible from being homeless. And cities seem to be literally designing themselves and restructuring their law and their enforcement. The entire system of government seems to be targeting these homeless people, so they must not want them to be homeless. And homeless people must not want to be homeless. It doesn't look very fun. So why don't we just provide these people with a system, assistance, way to get out of that place? But we do. I work in one. In Cookville, we have Plateau Mental Health. Here in Chattanooga, we have Johnson Mental Health. Those are just two facilities that provide a variety of programs, like PATH, the Pathway to Emergency Housing, which is a system that if you apply and they accept almost everyone, all it requires for you to be on your way to becoming homed again is to pee in a little cup. And nowadays, you take a COVID test too. Are they afraid of tiny cups? I don't understand. If the systems are there, and the cities and police and the homeless people themselves and us paying for all of it with the taxpayers' money, if we all want these systems to work, to stay at maximum capacity, then why do none of these systems report maximum capacity? Why are there still homeless people who seem lost? So, data on large groups of people is one half of my interdisciplinary study, sociology. And we've been talking about a lot of these sociological factors, but also some of the psychological factors of homelessness, the stuff that's individual that people deal with. But I'd like to talk about a very specific psychological factor that I think contributes to the cycle of homelessness. It's called learned helplessness. Now, the theory is mostly accredited to a man named Seligman, who is in 1972 came up with this theory, landmarked it, as it were. And the basic idea is when someone experiences enough repeated events of trauma, they can learn that this emotion, this feeling of helplessness, where all these bad things have happened and I haven't been able to stop them. So going forward, if I were to put in effort, I likely would still not be able to stop these terrible things from happening. It used to be bad. It's bad now. There's nothing I can do about it. It'll just keep being bad. And this system of learned helplessness is in a variety of aspects of life, but it has been demonstrated to be in larger proportions in the homeless community and in communities of people dealing with mental health issues, or in ex-cons, or people dealing with addiction. So if I'm homeless and something bad happens to me because I'm homeless, because I'm more likely to be targeted as a victim of violence or sexual assault, then I develop a feeling that there's nothing I can do to stop it, so I shouldn't protect myself. I shouldn't fight to get off the streets, because even if I got into a home, these things would still keep happening to me. There's nothing I can do to stop it. Well, then I expose myself to more risk. An example given by some of the people who researched the factor of learned helplessness and addiction after Seligman talked about the increased risk of HIV and other transmissible diseases. It basically goes like this. I'm an addict, and I've experienced trauma in my past, and I've gotten sick before because of my addiction. Well, there's nothing I could do about that. And so, or at least I feel that way. And so when it comes to me to put in the extra effort to get clean needles, I shrug. I say, oh, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to catch HIV either way. Everybody that I know has it, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. So I'm not going to get clean needles. Why worry about it? What does it matter? I'm helpless. I've learned, been taught in my life that I am helpless. And this is the core of Seligman's idea. And I think that we see this a lot in these communities that are at risk of being targets for all these things, because it's easier to learn to be helpless when the world is telling you that you're helpless. Population of people who is more likely to be a target of violence. Their lives are dangerous. They are often sick. They are taken advantage of. Everything from the physical architecture of the city to the police's enforcement to the city's laws are all coming after them. They're likely to spend most of their days behind bars just for being homeless. They have a high comorbidity with other, even more dangerous things. Their life expectancy is so short. Homelessness can be deadly. And at the same time, there are programs available like PATH for them to reach out to. But they're not, because they've learned that curling up into a ball is equally as effective as advocating for yourself because of all the trauma that they've experienced in the past. So what do we do? Well, Seligman and other people have proposed a form of therapy for primary care people who are taking care of this population called SET, which is self-efficacy therapy, self-efficacy training. And this form of education focuses around identifying in somebody's life a small thing that they can do to cause an effect in their lives. It seems small at first, but you need to work up from there. So an example given often in SAT is the clean needles. If I am somebody who deals with heroin addiction or fentanyl addiction, and I've resigned myself to contracting HIV. Everyone I know in this community has HIV. I've gotten sick before. There's nothing I can do about it. I might as well just use the dirty needles. It's easier, it's cheaper than having to go and get clean needles. What we show them is data that says that actually, no, you can really affect the possibility of you contracting HIV just by getting clean needles. Here's a place where you can go and get clean needles. I will provide you with some clean needles now. And so they learn that, oh, it's actually using this I have learned self-efficacy because my action has had a consequence. Well, then we work up from there. We show them that they do have self-efficacy. They can be efficacious on their own. That's the core idea of SET, is that you can offer somebody, here's the opportunity to work hard and get what you want. But if the person has learned that it's probably a nil game to begin with, then we have to start with that thought process, that feeling of helplessness. And self-efficacy turns out to be the cure. But education in other ways can also be important. Sure, that's a great way to treat the physical learned helplessness within a person, but also education for other people can be important. If you work in primary care like I do, then it can be important to recognize features like these of being homeless that you have not think about from the outside. These internal struggles that they deal with that are barriers to them receiving the care that they need. And you must recognize them so that you can work around those barriers to get them the help that they need. Education can also be important for anybody in this topic. Sure, you might not be the one providing self-efficacy training, but the next time that your local government is pushing a law that could target these already disenfranchised people, the next time you hear that your law enforcement is increasing their enforcement of these laws, or mandatory minimums for these things that are inescapable for this already in danger, at risk population is going into effect, it's time to make our voice heard. It's time to represent ourselves, to educate ourselves on what it's really like to live that way. Because you could end up there too. We all could. Sure, some of it is whether or not you're willing to work, but I'd say most of it would be luck. Anybody could end up on the side of the road there. And when you're walking down the street and you see somebody there lying, and you think to yourself just for a second, ooh, they're dirty, they're stinky. Ooh, I bet you they're lazy. I bet you they're the reason that they're there. Recognize what their lives are like, that they're at risk, that they're targeted by violence and sexual assault, that they're usually sick with any number of illnesses that they'll never get the treatment that they need for. Recognize that they're hungry. Recognize that they're tired and cold and often wet. That their lives are held, that the city itself is growing teeth, fangs, and spikes to push them away, and law enforcement is the only solution that we seem to be able to find is to put them away in a box and hope that we don't see them again, to forget about them, to lose them in a system or another. That they've learned that maybe they are helpless. And who wouldn't feel that way? If everyone is telling you that you're worthless and helpless and unable to be saved, and you'll never get out of that position, why wouldn't you feel that way?